I'm sure all of you all are here, gathered here, and want to listen to Prashanth, so I'll have the privilege of introducing him. Um, Prashanth perhaps needs no introduction. He's the founding partner of Excel, and in his long list of achievements, he's a really humble person. Uh, you know, but his achievements belie that. Of late, you all must be aware of this, but he even reached the level of being called to judge the business leaders of India by Economic Times for their awards that they hold every year. That speaks volumes of where he stands today in India. I will not talk about his biodata because all of you all would have read it and can read that. I will just share with you some glimpses of his journey. It all may seem that he's reached this far, but y'all have to keep in mind the struggle that he has gone through. He's advising startups day in and day out, but when he started, it was a real struggle. I still remember the first time I met Prashanth was when he was lugging around his laptop trying to sell the internet over here. That was way back in, I think, 91, 91, 92. Yeah, 94, so I stand corrected. And he had this PPT, and he would go laboriously through trying to convince people what the internet is all about. And fortunately, I had come back from CMU at that time, so I said, Prashanth, in the middle of the slides, and I said, Prashanth, that's enough. And maybe he thought, this guy's not interested. And I said, when can you start? And you have to imagine that the environment was very, very difficult for him. He did 4 pages for us, and now this is the part which will give you how difficult it was. The first 4 web pages that he put up for us, the way we saw it is I had to call a friend in the US, he took a print, faxed it to us, and that's how we saw them. So it was in that environment that Prashanth started. And then he went on to do a lot of good things into Netcraft and then, founding Excel. So a big hand for Prashanth. I think I'll not delay this any further. I'll invite him to deliver the evening keynote address. Yeah.
Thank you, Pradeep. So it's nice to kind of work with you again as part of this. I also remember Pradeep was never an easy customer. So I remember the number of trips I had to make to really finish that job. But anyway. So I think it's a pleasure and honor, and I'll tell you a small anecdote here. One of our partners, have you heard of Jim Schwartz? Yes. Okay, yeah. So Excel was founded, so me and Shubrato kind of got it started here in India, but globally, Arthur Patterson and Jim Schwartz were the founders of Excel. And I think maybe 5 years ago, he decided Schwartz wanted to do something for CMU, and that's when he donated a good chunk of money to CMU, and that's how the Schwartz Center came about, which is now, I guess, the hub for entrepreneurial activity on the campus. Right? So we have, and also, CMU is, the endowment is also closely associated with Excel. So we have, so there's a natural reason why I should be here and be in your midst. So that's, in respect to the keynote, I think it was it's a very open-ended kind of topic to kind of end with, right? And especially after you've gone through and listened to everybody, what more can you talk about this topic? So, but let me see, I'll see if there's a few perspectives I can share. But I think the larger perspective is really how fast things are changing, and we've, so Excel, for a lot of you in India, So globally, I think we've pretty much invested across the world, and we have a very big focus and belief that entrepreneurship is not going to be limited to the valley, or entrepreneurship is not going to be limited to one and that's the reason Accel was set up in India, in China, in London. And so entrepreneurship is going to come up wherever, and it's great to see all you folks, come back and start stuff here. And that's pretty much why Accel got started here in India. In India, we have been investing for about 10 years. We have invested in about 130 startups across really 3 key areas: consumer businesses, both internet-based consumer businesses, starting with Flipkart, and we have had the fortune of kind of being involved with most of the disruptive category-defining companies in this country, right? And the most recent one being Swiggy, that you all use hopefully on a daily basis. So I think what's changed in this country, and I think what's defined a lot of entrepreneurship change for us is just the quality of talent that is coming into entrepreneurship. So when we started out 10 years ago, which was just prior to the Flipkart, days, we would literally see maybe 4 or 5 plans in an entire month, right? So, and there would be weeks when we would have actually no entrepreneur even send an email. So that's how things were. But I think things changed around when the Sachin and Binny era kind of, it was really an inflective point in India when it was a confluence of, I think, the mobile era and, the belief in the next millennial generation within this country that, they didn't want to just go to the US and just be yet another kind of body there in the US, but really build something. And finally, capital, right? So capital started to come in to India around that 2006-07 kind of 8 time frame. So I think all that really fueled what we today see as a very healthy, growing and progressive ecosystem of startups. So and we are all fortunate also to be in Bangalore, right? So where a lot of this activity is centered. So before I get into it, just to kind of illustrate the pace of how things are changing, right? I thought I'll put a small quiz question out there, and I'll see maybe if somebody gets it, then you'll get something special from Accel, from one of our portfolio companies. So who's kind of slated to be the youngest billionaire? Who got it first? Yeah, I think you got it. Yeah. So it's Kylie, and so we're talking so much about the millennial 1.0 generation and the millennial 2.0s and how consumption is changing, but really I think we are probably at the cusp of even entrepreneurship changing now. With if you thought that the Zuckerbergs of our era and the entrepreneurs who kind of built these audacious startups, if that kind of defined the post services era in this in this country largely and even globally, I think we are probably at the cusp of really even more dramatic change with the Z generation, the next generation kind of coming into entrepreneurship. So while today so a lot of what I'll be talking today is still probably looking back and you know, we probably are at the cusp of even more dramatic changes. But I think there was, how many of you attended the startup panel? So there was a lot of talk in that panel about culture, right? And we have struggled with our startups. You know, it's very difficult when you get started to really understand the importance of culture. And you know, it's only when you start scaling and you see things start to break, that's when you realize, you know what, there's something not right here. You know, there's a need to get more cohesive. And you know, at Accel we have this kind of mentor program where we have a person at Accel who then goes into this startup and tries to help them discover their core values and kind of sets up guiding principles, which I'll talk about later, for these core values, and understand how to kind of set up a foundation to scale. And without defining the values of the organization, it's very tough to do that. So it's never easy. You know, we've kind of, I guess, for a generation, struggled to even get the right mission and goals for our organizations in place. And now you tell these startups, you know what, it's okay. It's not enough just to do that. You also need to get your values in place, and you need to align the organization to kind of live those values. So it's a daily challenge for us, because on the surface it's very easy and everybody knows that these things need to get done, but in the scheme of things, they just never get done, right? So they're more relegated to you know, something that, okay, when we get larger or when we scale, we'll kind of figure out what they should be. So that's a challenge now. But I think, so what I wanted to kind of focus on is really what are the pillars. Agility is something we all say, okay, you need to have agility in your organization. You need to really have a way to pivot, have a way to kind of constantly embrace competition, embrace change, embrace what's happening around you. But how do you, what do you do to really build an environment that kind of supports that, right? So I was trying to understand, I was trying to think to myself, you know, what are the key things that going beyond values, going beyond what your mission and goals are, how do you set up your organization to kind of flourish and do well in our environment, right? So these are the three things that I'll talk about, and I'll try to talk about them in the context of some of our companies, and what is there anything else that you think that's very central? See, there's the usual aspect of tools and collaboration, which I'm kind of skipping, right? So I think we all know what's the value of collaboration. We have tools like Slack and you know, Dropbox, and so the things that I'm not really covering in our topics that I'm sure you know, whether it's the design of spaces today. So the transformation of workspaces to more college-like spaces and university-like spaces. It's the use of technology to make more workspaces more exciting, and like I said, you know, some of the tools. So that's probably something that we have read enough. So I wanted to more kind of look at concrete examples within some of our startups and see how you know, you could have some takeaways in the startups. How many of you here are actually are in the midst of building a startup? Okay, good chunk of people. So I think there's, a lot of talk about diversity. And what we are starting to see is really a need to actually blend. So it's very common, to when we have the average age in our startup is around 26 to 28 years, and it's so in a typical large organization, the challenge is about how do you kind of embrace new thinking into the organization, and how do you bring in younger talent, more disruptive thinking in the organization, more lateral thinking in the organization. So in startups, we actually have a different problem. So we have a lot of the entrepreneurs taking a real first principles path to a lot of what they do, when it's probably not the most efficient thing. So if you're building a startup, look at also bringing in experienced talent in a measured manner, right? So we've had this reverse diversity issue where younger folks don't necessarily respect experience, and don't necessarily, and I think it's one thing is to respect the value of domain. So for example, if you're a retail startup, or actually the biggest area where we have found a challenge is in the creative and the marketing spaces, right? Organizations, and this is most tech companies are started by people with engineering and technology backgrounds, right? And they are very comfortable with anything to do with product and engineering, but just not comfortable with dealing with the more creative type of folks. So what's the solution? They typically try to hire an agency, and that's never going to work, because if you're building a brand, what your brand stands for and what your brand is about has to come from within the organization. So co-founders or founders need to kind of understand how to fill some of the gaps within the organization, and they have to realize that they have to learn to work with these diverse set of people to be able to build the right completeness in the team. So we have started a whole series in Axel on educating our founders on marketing. Marketing is one of those, people have very different notions of what marketing is, and based on whether you're a B2B company or a B2C company, whether you're selling to customers just within India or you're selling to customers globally, there's very different notions. And we have started to kind of go down this path of saying, we'll take this extra effort to educate our entrepreneurs on how to understand the value of some of these kind of skills which are not natural to them, and they don't necessarily have, they're not in their comfort zone, and they need to get the right talent in these areas into the organization. So embracing diversity, like I said, goes beyond just gender diversity. I think it's about embracing experience, and as startups get into more B2B areas, which are more domain heavy. So for example, we recently founded something with a startup called Kogo Port, which is in the logistics space, right? So port logistics is a 1,000-year-old or a 500-year-old business. So doing anything in that space without embracing experience will not make a lot of sense. So really the message here is that diversity in all its forms needs to be a core aspect of what the founding team needs to understand and embrace. So this is Girish, who's the founder of Freshdesk, one of our Freshworks now. So I think when we had this whole session on values this morning, I think one of the things I did bring about is this whole idea that HR is not it's not a central problem of any one individual in the organization. And what values, the ability to kind of codify values and build guiding principles to operationalize that values lets you kind of make HR everybody's problem. So to give you an example, in the case of Freshdesk, one of their core values is, can you make this the happiness quotient? They want to build the highest happiness quotient that there can possibly be in an organization. So, and how do you do that, right? So, one of the guiding principles that they have come up with is that every manager needs to identify and spend that extra time to identify the intrinsic capability and the skill that is unique to every individual in Freshworks, right? And they believe that by identifying what is unique and intrinsic to that individual, you'll be able to, one, make sure that the person, because it's so intrinsic to that, you're tapping into the right skill of that individual, and that person will be more naturally willing to work in that area and contribute in that area. And that then becomes the responsibility of every manager in the organization. So when you codify it and when you operationalize it as a guiding principle in that manner, you don't have to do anything special to constantly reinforce and constantly articulate these values, because it's part of how day-to-day business gets done in the organization. So there's usually a need to kind of refresh some of these guiding principles at different stages of the organization. When we have seen that even in the case of Freshdesk, there's a point when if you had to kind of live with some of the same principles, they're not that effective anymore. So we've been encouraging some of our companies to say that maybe every 2 years you relook at the operating principles, the guiding principles that you're using within the organization to kind of implement some of your values. So I think the other important aspect that we have seen in a lot of our organizations is the need to hire people. It's important not to kind of templatize hiring based on what you see are some of the successful startups around you. The most common mistakes we've seen founders do is that, if I hire a bunch of folks from the IITs, or if I hire a bunch of folks from the top institutes, I've probably solved my senior leadership problem. But that's never the case. I think it's really important to really fit the domain that you are in. So for example, if one of our companies, Fab Hotels, which is in the budget accommodation space, which is kind of standardizing budget accommodation across the country, as a principle, the founders are from IIT, but they did not necessarily see the value for the business they are in of hiring all their senior staff from the IITs, and they had they came up with certain specific characteristics and specific traits in what they believe is sufficient and necessary to for senior leadership, for the right to get the right senior leadership in place. So I think you also need to understand that it's just not about getting somebody who has gone through that an IIT filter into your organization, and that person is necessarily going to be happy doing what they're doing. So it's one thing to build culture and values in the organization, but then having a lens of that when you hire people into the organization is never easy, because there is so much pressure to get people into the door. You're scaling like crazy, things are falling apart. How do you get the right talent? So I would encourage you to kind of really take a step back and say, what would be the right fit of somebody who's coming into my organization? What should be their passion? What should be, so who would be the right person to build, let's say, the future of Book My Show? The future of Book My Show is not just about movie ticketing, right? So they want to define all of outdoor entertainment in this country, whether it's sports or whether it's bringing in Disney into this country, bringing in Cirque into this country. So who would be the right person to be a senior leader here? Yes, of course, you can bring in person from any other industry and make the person kind of adapt and make work. But if you can kind of take that extra time to really see what would be the right cultural fit for somebody to kind of come in and naturally be successful in your organization, that would make things a lot more efficient. So the other thing that we have seen is, I think there's a lot of openness to shift roles within the organization. And one of the ways we have been able to achieve in most of our companies is to constantly, the idea is not to change somebody's role, but the idea is really, how do you keep them constantly, motivated, and how do you have them, also it's a process where we have seen that, they also find their kind of sweet spot, right? So I would encourage, in early stage startups, it kind of happens very naturally because everybody's doing everything, and there is a natural ability to kind of spot and see, okay, so is this person doing better in product? Is this person doing better as in a growth kind of scenario? So, but as organizations kind of scale, I think we lose, people go kind of get set into like very traditional models, and I don't think there is, I think there is a lack of, getting people to constantly be challenged and kind of get an opportunity to do newer and other different things within the organization. So how many how many of you in startups today are using the idea of pods or tribes or squads? Okay, so I think there's hierarchies get built. I mean, when you start scaling beyond 100, 200, 300 people, and it's what we have seen is that every so often you need to kind of break down those hierarchies, right, within your organization. So you need to realign them based on either customer centricity and based on themes around whatever you define as the right structure to be able to deliver most efficiently. And so I would encourage you as startups to kind of constantly, build cross-functional, manageable team units that, that would, and the whole idea is, especially if you're in the, if you're in a business, if you're in a SaaS business, or if you're even in a consumer business that is software driven, we encourage organizations to get to a stage where there is a release every 2 weeks, right? And how do you get there? So how many of you who are in the startup business here actually make releases every 2 weeks? Okay, great. So there's some of you who do that. But I think that's the only way you can be on top of what you're doing, and it's important to kind of use some of these models to structure that. So AgroStar is the whole agri space is getting extremely exciting in this country, and it's really one of those greenfield opportunities where there's almost 50-60% of our of our adult population is involved in agriculture, but very little is being done there. So there's the startup that started by was started by these two guys who used this idea of a missed call to help a farmer get the right support, and also they also said, we can get you the right product, whether it's a nutrient, whether it's something to protect you from pests and so on. But very soon they realized that farmers are starting to get very comfortable interacting with smartphones, right? So they had to kind of totally realign the entire organization, and they just had, the whole pivot of going from an organization that engaged with farmers over phones to an organization that now is totally engaged with farmers with a cell phone. They've actually done this transformation in less than 6 to 9 months, right? So they are engaged with 1 million plus farmers now on an ongoing basis with a mobile phone, and this would not be possible if the entire organization did not kind of see this as something that they need to very quickly kind of pivot into, right? So I think it's extremely important to for the leadership to spot some of these opportunities. So this opportunity to kind of now transform the organization from something that was dependent on a call center to something that is now where they could leverage asynchronous way of engaging with the farmer is an opportunity that either they could have made this transformation over a 1-2 year period, or really make this transformation in a 6 to 9 month period and really take advantage of that, right? So, so the thing I'm trying to emphasize here is, I think the agility with which you make some of these transformations is really key, and would differentiate between an organization that was, for example, in this case, was very early in the agro space, but got flanked or disrupted by somebody else who saw that call centers are not the way to engage with your farmers, but smartphones are the way to engage, right? So you need not always get disrupted if you're able to move based on what you see are changing realities or possibilities. So I think some of this has probably been covered with on the HR panel, but we aggressively hire for learnability, right? So, and this is for the other reason that I spoke about. We don't know when a person gets into an organization what's the real sweet spot role that the person may actually flourish and do well in, right? So it's and I think Urban Clap is one of those organizations that spends a tremendous amount of time trying to understand for each candidate that they get in, what would be, what's the ability of that person to kind of fit into any role, and how quickly can that person kind of adapt and get productive in that role. And in the case of Swiggy, I think they have strongly encouraged debate and different individuals in an organization. I mean, different groups, even trying parallel experiments. So for example, there's never going to be an agreement on a approach or a solution within some of these early environments, because nobody knows what's going to work. So of course, you can if it's just a pure software problem, sometimes you can A/B test and very quickly arrive at what really is working. But what do you do if some of these require more evolved, thought through operational implementations before you can really see what works and what really is the ideal solution? So in those cases, they've had these individual groups kind of go out and kind of challenge each other and really see what wins. And some of them could be in conflict with each other, but that's fine. So I think it's important to kind of not stop with just debates and discussions on some of this, but empower people to go a few steps further and actually see to prove or disprove something that they strongly believe in. And finally, a little bit around, I think we are still early days in the startup environment in this country. I don't think there's a lot of wealth creation that has happened across the board through ESOPs. So it's extremely important to kind of find ways to get employees that you're hiring see value in ESOP. And we have constantly encouraged some of our portfolio companies to devise ways in which we can get employees to see some early value of the wealth that they're building within the organization. And companies and founders are starting to kind of do that proactively. So if you're a $1 billion company, if you're a $2 billion company, it's easier when you raise your next round of funding, you raise 20, 30 million, it's easy to kind of do a little bit, you raise 200, 300 million, and it's easy to do a small ESOP buyout of 5, 10 million. But we have seen even companies that raise maybe a Series C or a Series B, usually Series C of about 25, 30 million, kind of give a small, do a small buyout of some of the ESOP that kind of reinforces that belief and gets people to see some liquidity and some value. So I think I think the reason I'm talking about it is that because we are in kind of the early stages of building entrepreneurship and building and having people kind of acquire wealth in our ecosystem, it's extremely important for companies to be creative in how they're able to demonstrate that real value is being accrued by employees as they stay and perform within the organization. So I think to summarize, I think you just have to believe in, like I mentioned, whether it's a group within the organization that has a strong belief in something, whether it is specific individuals who fit in a diverse set of roles and need to be given the opportunities to perform in those roles. I think it's really important to kind of give them that flexibility, give them that freedom, and empower them to deliver. So with that, I'd like to really open up for some questions, and please feel free to ask anything that you ever wanted to ask somebody who is an investor and who's.
Hello, yeah. Thanks for the talk, Prashanth. Really enjoyed your experience with your portfolio companies. Since the whole day we've been talking about the future of work, and the early sessions we talked about how automation and AI is going to disrupt jobs. So on a related note, I just want to know how you think AI will disrupt the VC industry, with a view that, you must have heard of this company called Social Capital in the US, which is doing capital as a service. With the whole thesis that, human biases are, distorting where investments are going. So just wanted your thought on that and how you think that could play out.
So I think the way I would characterize is it's capital plus service. So I don't think it's, it's never going to be a case where just capital is going to be sufficient anymore. A lot of expectations from entrepreneurship, from entrepreneurs today are never met. I think a lot of investors talk about smart capital. I think there is a lot of expectations when an entrepreneur gets funded about the type of mentoring they would get, and there's the type of inputs they would get and support they would get. I think those will become, I think there's going to be a lot of that question. And funds that are more serious about being able to provide those services. So we need to look at ourselves as a service organization. Capital is a given, right? So what are we doing? So what we're doing at Accel is actually building something called the portfolio services capability, right? So across multiple functions, whether it is marketing, product, people. So we are trying to see how can we accelerate and how can we really kind of make a difference beyond capital to how a company can scale. And to do that, I think you need to, as an organization, go beyond just asking the entrepreneur for updates and asking the entrepreneurs for the next set of metrics. You really need to be able to contribute to change those metrics. You need to really be able to contribute to make those transformations. Like I can tell you in the case of AgroStar, I think I can confidently say that it was as much Accel's contribution to transform them from a call center based organization to a smartphone organization, the kind of inputs on product, on understanding the farmer's journey, understanding various aspects of what would change if you kind of were more full stack in what you did with the farmer. So what I'm saying is that I think there's going to be a lot more collaborative company building, which was taken for granted, or just people thought capital is good enough. So that's not going to. So I don't think AI in itself. AI could be an internal tool that we use to kind of spot and kind of better filter some of our organization. But ultimately, the value of capital has to be complemented with a strong set of capabilities and services that come from venture organizations, and that's what we're trying to do next.
Online question, and I would like the answer in 3 bullet points.
3 bullet points,
Yeah.
okay?
Like, what are the top 3 things you look for when you invest in any startup? 3 things only, top 3 things.
I was actually talking to somebody today, and I don't know if that, he's there. I exactly told him 3 things.
Was this pre-arranged?
I don't know if this, do you both know each other? No. Yeah. So anyway, I think, so maybe this is now going to, it'll be 3 things, but I'll kind of digress a little bit, right? Because for each of them, so this first thing is the size of the opportunity, right? And that's not an easy one because it's really dependent on the size of the fund, right? So that's where it's very important which funds do you approach based on the size of the opportunity that you're going after. So are you going to go to a $50 million fund? Are you going to go approach a $100 million fund, a $500 million fund, or a $1 billion fund? And all of them are going to have very different expectations, or they're going to have very different lenses on how they look at this idea of what's the size of the opportunity. So I think most entrepreneurs are extremely optimistic and unrealistic about the opportunity size, right? So I think I would encourage you to actually work with somebody who can, because I think one of the big things that is a big negative flag for us is if an entrepreneur comes in and there's 2 things that we find as very big negatives. One, they'll say there's no product like this that exists anywhere. This is really the first. This is the first product, and there's no competition, right? So and you'll be surprised. We see that every day, and this is not. I mean, you would think that by now people would kind of get smarter at this and not say it's. I mean, there's so much. There's no longer information asymmetry, right? You know what's happening with every startup around you. So how can you still come and say that you don't see much competition, right? So I mean, I know that as founders, you got to be delusional, but you can't be that delusional, right? So I think it's extremely important to kind of get the right kind of advice before you approach a VC to understand what is the realistic opportunity set that specifically you're trying to address and you're kind of trying to go after. And the more refined and the more realistic you are on that, I think you have a better chance. We like it. So that's the first one. The second big thing is around the team, right? Everybody tells you team, right? So what about the team, right? So I think we look at it's the kind of the mindset of the team. Again, it's not about. I don't think we go in with a specific mindset that okay, these 2 are. There's an IIT IIM guy, and these guys can really look. I mean, crack anything, and this is a well sorted team. That I think we have gone beyond that. So we think problems are very diverse in this country. I don't think the type of startups that will come up and the type of problems that need to be solved in this country for the next 10 years are in some ways never going to be the same as the kind of startups and the kind of entrepreneurs. So I'm not saying that the next set of IIT guys will not build the next $500 million or $1 billion companies in this country, but I think they will be very, very diverse set of entrepreneurs with very, very different capabilities and skills that will build the next $100 or $500 billion companies. So what we try to assess is the kind of the suitability of the entrepreneur or the co-founders for the particular domain they're trying to go after, or the problem that they have selected. So, and I think there is a level of authenticity that kind of gets discovered through multiple conversations. And it's, again, it's something that we get better at as investors because it's very easy for somebody to show that they're extremely passionate about a space, but they've actually thought about it 2 months ago and have just fallen in love with that space, which sometimes is possible, but really, do they really relate to that, and do they are they going to stay the course and kind of do that for the next 5-10 years is what we try to decipher. So it's not only the completeness of the team to be able to tackle that particular problem, but the authenticity of the passion that they're showing or demonstrating is what we try to understand, right? That's the second point. And the third point is we'd like to see some signals in terms of your execution capabilities. It's not, I mean, so we are very early stage investors, we are seed investors. We are okay if you can't show a lot of data, but show us something that demonstrates your ability to operationalize the capabilities that you claim that as a team you're able to bring to the table, right? So whatever those early metrics are, whatever those early signals are, whatever those early success elements are, you need to be able to show some of that. I would say these are the three.
I think that's a great note to probably.
There's one question probably
Oh,
we
okay.
can finish.
Last question. Who was this? Yeah. Excellent.
Hi. I thank you so much for this session. It's very, very informational. One of the questions, I think, things you mentioned about hiring and scale, right? I'm a founder, and I find that we have to scale massively, right? Given
Yeah.
that we raised Series A recently, but the problem is getting the right talent. Even though we have so many students and so many good people out there, finding the right talent is so difficult, and the cost of hiring a wrong person is disastrous, because not only that they don't perform, but they actually spoil the culture of the company sometimes.
Right.
So how can you give any advice on that? Because there's an investor pressure, we have to scale and do wonders overnight, but at the same time hiring a rock star, people who in the founding team, that you always be lucky with the founding team, you just can't do it alone as a founder. So how do we tackle that problem? Any advice on that?
It's a marketing problem, right? So so you got to look at recruiting as a marketing problem, right? So if you got to build a funnel, a marketing funnel or any funnel, just think of all the effort that you need to put in to make that work. And I think it all starts with branding the opportunity. And I think once you're able to brand the opportunity of why somebody should work with you, I think it's easier to disseminate that message. It's impossible to, so I mean, you could be using multiple channels, you could be using multiple folks within your own organization to kind of distribute that creation of the funnel, right? So unless you're able to kind of spend a little bit of time to make it or to codify really why somebody should come and work for your organization, it's very difficult to get an impactful message out there. And it could be coming up with possibly a specific idea or concept of why working in your organization is better than working somewhere else, right? So you need to, I think it's important to differentiate why somebody should join you, right? So it's, I think it's a combination of that, plus what I've also seen, I don't think the senior team spends enough time on recruiting, right? Do you have funds that have invested in you, or you're bootstrapped? Sorry? We are funded. You are funded. So I would strongly encourage you to kind of network within the portfolio of the company, of the fund that has. Oh, it's a family fund. So what we try to do is really kind of bring in a widening of the network, because a lot of these companies don't necessarily compete with each other, right? If you can kind of expand that, that really helps. But largely it's about spending enough time and branding and marketing the opportunity to work with you.
Thank you so much, Prashanth.
Thank
That was a great talk.
Thank
and
you.
I'm sure our alumni have, let's have a round of applause first.
Thank you.